As while he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, "Your daughter is dead, don't trouble the teacher any further." But Jesus ignores them. And he says, "Don't fear, only believe." So there's that emphasis on faith again. The woman's faith has made her well. Now he's calling for the people to have faith so that Jairus' daughter can be made well. And he takes with him into the house, this is something that's distinctive of Mark's gospel. He tells you that he takes Peter, James, and John, this inner circle of Jesus, who are the ones he picks to go up the mountain for the transfiguration. They're also the ones he takes to the mountain of Gethsemane. And I think the fact that he selects them shows this is a significant miracle. Jesus thinks there's something special about this miracle, and he takes them into the room in order to heal them. And then he says something that's a little weird, and I think has troubled and confused a lot of people, because he says, "Why do you make a tumult and weep? The child is not dead, but sleeping." And so this is a little puzzling because it raises the question, is the girl actually dead? Is this a miracle of death and resurrection? Or is she just asleep, right? And it's not clear. Mark doesn't answer that explicitly. We kind of have to try to infer from the text. My personal reading on the text is that the child has in fact died, but that Jesus has already responded to Jairus' faith and humility at the beginning by bringing her back to life. But what he's now going to do is go in and raise her from sleep, precisely because the miracle of the raising of Jairus' daughter isn't just a miraculous healing of a particular child at a particular place in a particular village in the 1st century AD. It's a sign. It's meant to point beyond itself to what Jesus will do with every one of us in the resurrection of the dead. And I think you can kind of see that when he goes to the child and says to her, "Talitha kumi." That's an Aramaic expression. Talitha means little girl, and then kumi in Aramaic literally means arise, get up, stand up. Kum is the Hebrew there, the Hebrew version of the same thing. Talitha kumi, little girl, I say to you, arise. And she got up and she walked, and she was 12 years old. So in this sense, the raising of Jairus' daughter from sleep is a kind of anticipation of our final resurrection from the dead. Because in Jewish culture and in the New Testament, you probably know this if you've read it through, death is ordinarily referred to as going to sleep, as being asleep, right? Paul talks about this in his letters, we shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. That's in 1 Corinthians 15. What he means is we will not all die, right? But we'll all be changed. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4, Paul's writing to the Thessalonians, and they said some of them are distressed because their brothers and sisters have fallen asleep, meaning that they've died. Revelation talks about blessed are those who fall asleep in the Lord, meaning those who have died in the Lord. Ancients always saw an analogy between sleep and death, right? That sleep, in a sense, was like this is my words, not theirs, but it's like a little sacrament of death, right? At the end of each day, we succumb to our weakness. We have to close our eyes. We have to lay down and sleep. And in the morning, we rise again, right, to begin a new day. So it's like a little anticipation of what awaits us at the evening of our life, at the end of our life. So, we will talk about death through euphemisms. We'll talk about someone passing away, which is it's a metaphor from like a journey, like they've gone from this place to another place. Another metaphor would be they've fallen asleep, which puts the emphasis on the immobility of the body, right, on the weakness of the flesh. And then rising again, the resurrection, draws on that motif, right? That we stand up again when we're brought to new life. So Jesus' raising of the little girl in this Gospel of Mark, in a sense, it kind of parallels the resurrection of Lazarus in the Gospel of John, which is also a sign that points forward to the ultimate miracle and the ultimate healing, which is the healing of death itself, the triumph over death itself, which Jesus is going to bring through his resurrection. And then finally there, you'll notice, evidently being dead is something that makes you hungry, because Jesus is concerned with the little girl's needs. He says, give her something to eat. And I think that's just kind of neat little witness to the humanity of this miracle here, that he tells them to give her some sustenance after being raised from the dead. And puts that emphasis too on the 12 years. Mark emphasizes that 12 years and brings this, a better term than sandwich is an inclusio, a literary inclusio, where one story is included in a frame there to its close. Beautiful story, beautiful miracle, and a powerful scene from the Gospel of Mark. Okay, so that's the Gospel for today. What's the significance for us, and how does it link with the Old Testament reading? Well, in this case, it's really fascinating, the Old Testament reading that was chosen for the day. It's from the book of Wisdom in the Old Testament. And it's a remarkable passage, very countercultural passage. It's about the origins of death. Now, if you haven't read the Wisdom of Solomon in the Old Testament, this is one of those books that is only in the Catholic Old Testament. It's not in the Protestant Old Testament, and it's also not in the Jewish Hebrew Bible. It's a book that's preserved for us only in Greek. We don't have any Hebrew copies of it. And it's one of the wisdom books of the Old Testament. And this is one of my favorite books in the Old Testament. I really love the Wisdom of Solomon. And it begins by recounting the creation of human beings and the origins of sin and death. So it's kind of retelling the story of the fall of Adam and Eve in the book of Genesis. But it's highlighting a very important point. You could say that the main theme of this first reading for the day is that God did not make death. That God is not the origin of death, but that human beings are the ones who, through our sin, bring death into the world and make death a part of human existence. So let's just read the scripture for today, and I'll try to unpack it. In Wisdom chapter 1, verse 13, it says this: God did not make death, and he does not delight in the death of the living. For he created all things that they might exist, and the generative forces of the world are wholesome, and there is no destructive poison in them. And the dominion of Hades is not of earth, for righteousness is immortal. And then it skips a number of verses and it takes another passage from chapter 2 with the same theme. It says this: For God created man for incorruption and made him in the image of his own eternity. But through the devil's envy, death entered the world, and those who belong to his party experience it. So there are basically 4 points being made here that are crucial. Number 1, that God is not the origin of death. That's the first point. God did not make death. This is not something he created. When he creates the world, he creates it so that things might have life, so that they might exist. That's the first point. The origin of death lies not with him. Second point, creation. That God is the author of the universe, and that his will, his original will for created things, is that they might exist. Right? Not that they might die and be corrupt, but that they might exist. He creates the world so that it might actually be. And wisdom says that the dominion of Hades is not of earth, but righteousness is immortal. In other words, righteousness, which is a virtue, it's a characteristic that comes from God, is something that's ordered toward immortality. It's ordered toward life. It's ordered toward not just any kind of life, not just a temporary life, but a life that goes on forever and ever. The Greek word for immortality here is athanasia, literally means no death or deathlessness. Right? That's what immortality is about. And so what it's saying here is that when God makes human beings, even though we're finite creatures, the reason he made us is so that we might live forever. Right? And I think human experience bears this out. Right? You look around, people want to live forever. No one wants to die. We have this innate desire to avoid death and to live forever. Where's that from? Wisdom of Solomon is telling us that's something God made us with. That's something God implanted in us. That goes back to our original creation being ordered toward immortality. And so if that's the case, then the question, of course, arises, well, wait, where then is death from? And then the last point, the fourth point it's making here is, again, very countercultural. If you ask a secular person with a secular worldview, what is the origin of death? They would say, well, death is natural. Death is just part of the natural order. And therefore, if you believe that God is the author of nature, then therefore God is the author of death as well. So, in other words, we have God to blame for the death that's in the world. Wisdom of Solomon, following the Jewish scripture, says something very different. No. Fourth point, it's through the devil's envy that death entered the world. And those who belong to his party experience it. That's a direct allusion to Genesis 2-3, the account of the fall of Adam and Eve. That it's through the devil's envy, which is interesting, that's what's motivating him. He envies the fact that Adam and Eve are created in the image of God's eternity, in the image of likeness of God. He wants to take that away from them. And so through his envy, he tempts them to commit a sin that brings upon them not just the state of sin, but also ultimately the punishment of death, the effect of death. Genesis chapter 3, of course, after Adam eats, God says, "You are dust, and to dust you shall return." And then he drives them out of the garden in Genesis 3, lest they eat of the fruit of the tree of life and, quote, live forever. In other words, he denies them access to that which would give them immortality in this state of separation from him that they find themselves in after the fall. So, in other words, this is an account of the origin of death. And I think this is really, really important for us to stress, precisely because it's not natural, no pun intended, for us to look at things that way, living in a modern or postmodern secular worldview. Like, we've all been brought up in this postmodern secular context, or in a modern context, in which the secular world, does not view death through this lens. If you have secular people who believe that maybe God made the world, maybe they're kind of looking at the world from a deistic perspective, then according to that point of view, it's pretty common that people just assume that death is something God wrote into the created order. We tend to ignore the account of the origin of the death in sacred scripture in the Old Testament. But the church in the readings for today is juxtaposing this account in the gospel of suffering, the suffering of the woman with the hemorrhage, and death, the death of Jairus' daughter, with this Old Testament reading that's telling us death is not God's fault. Death is, at the end of the day, it's not his fault. It's the fault of the devil, Satan, the enemy of God, the angel of God, and of human beings who fell to that temptation and through their actions brought sin and death into the world. And so because of that situation, we need a savior. We need someone to rescue us. We don't have the power to rescue ourselves from suffering and death. It doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter how rich you are, doesn't matter how famous you are. At the end of the day, you are going to suffer and eventually you're going to die, right? Because that's the lot we find ourselves in the human state. And so the psalm for today is actually a psalm about that. It's about